30 minutes
Ah.
driving to high school.
Okay, so you didn't live in La Jolla, or you did?
No.
So
Yeah.
where did you live?
I was in Carmel Valley.
Carmel
which is
Valley. Okay.
Like 30 minutes north.
Okay. Okay. And that it's a little inland.
Yeah, it's not right on the water.
I went to a bike race. I was in a bike race there.
Oh, nice. My dad loves biking.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Okay. All right. This is background. This is the second half of the course. We're building. We've got 5 big frames, but we've got many options to combine these, and we're looking for ways of comparing and understanding better different cities and where and why they're so different from one another. And we can look for some aspects of shared, but the variations are just as important to stress as the things which are shared. So what I want to do is also bring in. All right, my link to my video is missing. Who has or could find? Yeah, actually, some of you may be trying to ask if you wear masks. I'll put a couple masks if you don't. Some people, I think, it's about anybody else have a mask? We had a professor.
Is there masks?
Yeah, I'm still going to ask Professor Chin. You had a trip to New York.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Huge and powerful transportation.
And what's say pollution?
Pollution, I think is fine.
What did
Not
you
very serious.
I was trying to just to understand. You had one word. It was not pollution.
Transportation?
Transportation.
Yeah, transportation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such as
Transportation, not like
subways, buses,
yes.
taxis.
There are 3 systems different from Chicago. Have 3 systems, like metro system and the subway system. These 3 different. And at first I made a mistake. I bought the wrong tickets for $27. Wasted the money. Yeah.
What did you see that was? Anybody else need a?
Yes.
Need a mask? There. Okay.
Thank you.
What did you see that was different in New York?
I think first it's more population and because this is the first the largest city.
Stop for a second. Could someone please look for a couple of videos that we could show here, since mine failed? Anything we have on Chicago and its disturbances, boarding up of Michigan Avenue, the mayor getting very upset, and then how much this was shared then and continuing today, linked with boarded up downtowns in San Francisco. I've seen videos of Berkeley, San Francisco, Atlanta, and other things, a little bit like that. I want to build on that. Okay. If anybody, if you could find that, how could we then, or you then connect? Well, if you could connect to, but if you just have that machine, can you connect that to either VGA or HDMI cables? I've got an adapter, but that only works on this.
Maybe I can send you the links of whatever I found. Maybe I can send you the links if I find stuff and you can do it through it.
I'm trying not to have more. Anybody else have a solution?
I can do it with an HDMI port.
Okay, okay. If you could do that would be great. Okay.
And any videos?
Yes. Now it's short. I mean, we want 2 minutes or less. Things like that. That is, we may find if we can find something general about that, similar, that would be great. But we try to ideally have at least Chicago and a little bit of other cities. Okay. We're getting into that with some brief references to other cities, and we're gonna continue to bring these in. We have these problems right now continuing, in a sense. They are not as visible every minute as they were 2 or 3 years ago, but we still have, that is, let me back up more. Just if we take Chicago. Who's the mayor of Chicago now?
Johnson.
Brandon Johnson. What's he stand for? Nobody really knows. Any quick ideas of what he said that anybody wants to bring in? Help the poor more, redistribute from the rich to the poor, potentially impose a fee, a large or substantial, fee on the trading of options, which is one of the biggest financial activities in Chicago in the world. And so the critics say this will drive out the whole, the financial industry from Chicago. And if we tax the poor, if we tax the rich to help the poor only in Chicago, we'll drive the rich out. What's the Peterson theory, at least, say about that? We had talked about that in a little bit of reading. Okay, Peterson said that 3 kinds of arenas. One is redistribution. And if you try to do taxing the rich in a city, the rich would just move to the suburbs or leave altogether. Peterson thus says, if you want to do redistribution, it should be mostly at the national level, maybe state combined with and in fact that's the way most of it happens. That is, the big transfers on welfare, disability, low income kids in schools, hospitals. These monies are from the national government. They're not raised locally for the most part. Okay, Brandon Johnson, our new mayor, has said the opposite. We're going to tax locally. Okay. One of the the most affluent individual in Illinois has left, and there are other. Anyway, so if you will, and that's one quick overview. When we have, so where does this come from? Trying to keep it simple, but lead in to the bigger issues. Clearly, this conflict, and some of it is blaming over race, blacks, whites, rich, poor. In that example of helping the disadvantaged versus the more advantaged. And the national media certainly stress this. the national government, President Biden, many of the issues are framed in terms of the disadvantaged and the in ways that clearly marching himself, walking, participating in the strike in Detroit, supporting the strikers against the corporate leaders of the automobile union. Pretty dramatic. Okay. What do mayors say, and how do mayors and others interpret these events and these kinds of policies? They are as confused as everybody else. They're smart, but many are very, very smart and sensitive, but they're also sensitive to the residents of the area. We talked about San Diego shifting from being predominantly Republican and moving in a Democratic direction, dramatically shifting its position on that. But just to give you an example, which when I did interviews myself in San Diego, in the more Republican days, the head of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, said it's the leading African American organization across the U.S. I interviewed him in San Diego, and I said, "What's it like in San Diego in contrast to other cities?" Well, I and our organization in San Diego, we're opposed to affirmative action. We don't want people to be hired because they have black faces. If they're incompetent, they shouldn't be hired. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan to be the director of affirmative action in Washington, D.C. That doesn't happen in Chicago. Okay, so I'm pointing to a specific example, not just to saying they're conservative, yes, but here's an example. This was particularly dramatic. For instance, I can go on, but what I'm getting at is to say we have problems. The Ukraine, Israel, ethnic conflict, the rich-poor. Putnam's discussion of bowling alone offered one interpretation that, in a sense, as if we have people building on Tocqueville's analysis, if people are not maintaining their membership and their activities in little organizations, from churches to neighborhood clubs to high school groups to neighborhood associations to environmental recycling. If these go down, this will suppress trust, and this in turn will lead to selfish individualism, and the political system will fall apart. Okay, I mean, basically to simplify there. What happened if we try to ask when there were, so we then have also, I'm pointing to the example, but let me see. Did anybody find anything we could use on the screen?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but this was back in April when a bunch of unruly crowds, teens, sort of stormed Chicago, and
sure, that's fine. If you maybe just sit down and try to see if you can plug that in. Let's see if it works. I'm just trying to be careful. These two cables. Take your time. And
I don't know if it compares to other cities.
To HDMI. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Right over here.
On that side.
Okay. And then this is on HDMI. It's on.
Making a total of 15 arrests after some of them got out of hand. Now, of course, there are also 3 people that were shot in the various incidents that happened over the weekend. Mayor Lori Lightfoot finally speaking about the incidents this morning. Mayhem on Michigan Avenue and other places downtown Saturday night, resulting in fights damaged vehicles, and terrified tourists as groups of young people took over the streets. 2 teenage boys were shot.
We have taken steps and will take steps to address these teen trends. It's not the first time that we've addressed these issues, but our young people have an opportunity and a right to enjoy the entirety of our city, but they have to do it in a way that is respectful for people and property.
On Friday night, a group of teens caused major disruptions at the 31st Street Beach. A 14-year-old was shot in the leg. The incident raising concerns for Alderwoman Sophia King, whose ward covers that area.
It was very serious, and we have to hold you accountable and responsible. But we also need to bring the city together because we do need to have activities for the youth.
Alderman Brendan Riley, whose ward includes the Loop, calling it lawlessness on the part of teens looking to score points on social media. He also questioned the police response, saying in a statement, "This feels a bit like Groundhog Day. Every year on our first warm weather weekend, it seems that CPD leadership is caught flat-footed and overwhelmed by these large groups of teens on our beaches and in our parks." Riley and others calling for accountability for the teens and their parents.
We need to call it out for what it is. You can't sugarcoat this, and you can't make excuses for that behavior. You need to hold them and their parents accountable for this and use everything that's in our toolbox to identify who they are and take the appropriate action so that we don't have this going on all summer long.
In a statement, Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson said, "In no way do I condone the destructive activity that we saw in the Loop and Lakefront this weekend. It is unacceptable and has no place in our city. However, it is not constructive to demonize youth who've been otherwise starved of opportunities in their own communities." City leaders obviously now looking to look at what happened this weekend and try to make a plan to make sure that doesn't happen for the next warm weekend.
Okay, that's fine. In a sense, it doesn't stress so much
Well, Chicago Police.
The boarding up, but the people involved and the sense of just put it over there. And how much this is a current issue. That Alderman Sophia King, I was one of about a dozen. The main person with not dark skin, but I've been here most of my adult life in Bronzeville, right there, and I've worked with lots of aldermen, and a former student here. First year when I was teaching here was Tony Preckwinkle. She's now president. She was alderman. She got me involved in this stuff in the neighborhood. And she's now president of the Cook County Board, and she ran for mayor and could have beaten Laurie Lightfoot, except for some short-term kinds of amazing things. Anyway, so volatility, but what I'm getting to is these were pretty dramatic like that as seen, and they were bigger across the U.S. from New York to San Francisco to L.A., etc. The surveys nationally of city residents asking you how much do you trust people, how much do you feel alone, how much do you not trust, not want to, how many do you talk to your neighbors and so forth. The city, the metro area that has the lowest level of trust and coordination and working together is Los Angeles, and Chicago is by no means unique, and many of the national stories about these things don't stress Chicago as the worst by any means. Sometimes it may be LA, sometimes it may be New York. New York then, in a sense, moved in the opposite direction of what has happened in Chicago in terms of mayors. Who can tell us about that? So we have Professor Chen. You've been in Chicago. What happened with the kinds of disturbances in New York and Atlanta and LA and San Francisco, and then what happened in electing the next mayor in New York? Who can fill that in? What was this about? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know the mayor of New York is Eric Adams, who was a police officer and who won on a coalition of black voters. I think he was the borough president of Brooklyn, as well as more what we would call white ethnic voters, so like Orthodox Jews and Italians and stuff like that, and he beat a more progressive Hispanic candidate.
Okay. Excellent. Eric Adams, police officer elected mayor to try to change the pattern. That is, the newly elected mayor in Chicago he defeated a candidate who was considered the police supported candidate, and the surveys said that the great majority, something like 65% of the voters of Chicago, citizens of Chicago, favored him. Brandon Johnson beat him, and why and how still remains unclear. One is that people were so confident that they were going to win that people didn't bother to turn out. Turnout was very important. By contrast, among young whites and minorities, mobilized in the last week or two. They had new songs, they had rallies, they had a huge meeting at UIC in an auditorium, and etc. And a sense of excitement that we could win, and they did. So the differences among cities, the unanticipated aspects of many parts of this make, and so you know, I've been, you know, I spent dozens of hours with Alderman King right there in the picture. She doesn't know. That is, she often says, let me listen. So she has her advisors sitting there, and we'll have maybe a dozen people, and we'll say very different things. We'll disagree with each other, but she'll listen, and then she'll say the next week or whatever. She'll say she may not. She doesn't say tell me. She listens, and then she says thank you very much. Then she does what she wants to do. But she basically, as did, just as in terms of style, Tony Brickwinkle even more so listened to citizens, at least the ones who would come out and talk. And they, in that sense, we can elaborate if you want. That is, the ones who show up and talk, she listens to. Some people who are more market-oriented say, no, that's Tocquevillian perhaps, but that's not Adam Smith's market. And so in that sense, it's not trying to capture the broader population, but it is very much what is now called populism. Okay, stressing. So what I'm getting to here is to say how to interpret these things and look for solutions or policy options. These are all over the U.S. Is this just the U.S.? Okay, the city that, as I mentioned, was the one that had the worst rankings in terms of many respects. They had a referendum, and Hollywood, that is some of the areas of L.A. County, including Hollywood and the San Fernando Valley, parts of that were going to withdraw and create a separate government, sort of becoming a suburb, so the city of Los Angeles in turn basically said we have to dramatically do something. And what they saw, when they discussed that, and I went to several meetings. I taught at UCLA for a semester, deliberately to try to understand better how and where and why. And we were having in the middle of this LA school debate, LA school, Chicago school, New York school. I wanted to get more of a flavor. And the LA experts predominantly said what Tocqueville said. If we don't have enough trust, we have people who are acting selfishly, we have the television continually shows, live coverage from a helicopter of one car that's, driving 100, 120 miles an hour, running away from the police. The police are trying to catch them. This is every month or two, something like that on the freeways. The freeways are okay. So that kind of thing reinforces the image that people are breaking the law. So what you saw here. One quick solution was Tocqueville gave us the causes. here's the solution, we need more participation. And so what the city council said, we will permit the creation of a little, basically a community government. And so they have about 80 of them now all over LA. And these are locally elected. People they're new, in addition to the mayor and the city council, they have these new council, these little councils, and they can do a variety of things. This built with these, many people showed up. There was high turnout. It seemed to be related to a style sort of like the New England moralistic style that Elazar had talked about in places like Pacific Palisades, around UCLA, Santa Monica. However, in the downtown area or the lower income Mexican and African American neighborhoods, not at all. You had maybe, 2% of the voters voted, and they tended to be the relatives and the friends who were police, school, social workers, or other people who had a particular orientation. And then the USC, the University of Southern California, got a large grant to study and evaluate these things. So I went to those meetings. I knew some of them doing those. Then they had open meetings to present the results. Maybe 200 people, and many of the people were presidents and activists within these community organizations. And one guy would show up and say, we have a problem. You don't want to let us do the way we want to do it. We want to have more funding from the city council and so forth. People then said, what proportion of the voters in your, or what was the number of people who voted for you and for the council? Well, there are about 112. Okay, yeah, they had tiny turnout in terms of the proportion, but he basically, it wasn't just that. He then went beyond it, and I can't give you an exact quote, but he basically was saying, I want to have a patron-client traditional organization. I want to have people I can have them have jobs and contracts and money that I can give to him, and I want to have their votes. So that, as I've talked to you, this is the most widespread classic urban as well as national form of politics in the world, and it still is. And so to have that in LA visibly discussed within the structure, this new organization, which was ostensibly a Tocquevillian small entity designed to create trust, it in fact led to patron-client being reinvented. Okay. So what do we do? Where's the research beyond this? This is one study, one city. The bigger area where the bigger, I'll mention two. One was LA again. LA was the so-called LA riots, where this was maybe 20 years ago. It was a trial. I won't try to get into specifics except to say that the police, the riots and the situation such as you saw in the little show there with Chicago, that was so bad that the police said, we will not go out. So they basically said, we're not going to work. We're not going to try to stop any crime. It's too dangerous. So the shopkeepers, many in low-income areas, got big guns and even machine guns on tops of their shops. Many of them were Korean, and many their shops were in African American and Hispanic Mexican areas. It was very visibly scary, and the Koreans were seen as particularly bad. And then there were very interesting differences and I'll just add a little bit. One thing that we're doing, as you know, in Scenescapes is studying specific shops and brand. And McDonald's never got burned. All the McDonald's were spared. One of the gasoline is a local gasoline station brand sold around LA. It has the opposite reputation. Many of them were completely burned and destroyed. So there were differences like that around LA and different. I'll add. When I was teaching there, I was training for a marathon, and so I would train, and I'd run for 10, 15 miles every other night all over LA. And I'd go all over different neighborhoods, and then I'd look for differences. So in the Korean neighborhoods, for instance, you could walk and run for a mile or two. No sign was in English, and then you'd have occasionally, after a mile, here's a little sign, English spoken. So that is the degree to which you have ethnic differentiation, and it continues in the suburbs even more dramatically. Entire suburbs in their style is Korean, Filipino, Asian Indian, etc. Okay. Where to make sense of this? Differences exist there. How have they compared? Most of those have been case studies, have been little books, small, and so that the USC data is better than most. But before that, you have a handful of books on individual neighborhoods or individual aspects of LA. And then people who have worked both in LA and Chicago, I've talked to a number of them who said there's much more nasty ethnic conflict in LA than in Chicago. The LA Times would feature front page, I'd say every second or third day, there were gangs killing each other, and in general, the Mexicans were larger in number and tougher, and they're moving north and successfully taking over street by street neighborhoods away from the African American gangs, taking it over for selling drugs, prostitution, etc. So how can we get a handle of some of this? What was studied, if we back up further, was the main, that is in the European context, of course, 1789, the French Revolution, 1848, the revolution which involved many Germans, the French, etc. Wagner and Nietzsche, left Germany and went to Switzerland. 1968 in Paris and New York, Berkeley, and so forth. This, in a sense, is the most recent, more or less within at least a couple of generations, recently in the U.S. and in Europe. And I will add more important, there's been research. So there's been lots of studies, many qualitative, ethnographic, biographies, and comparative kinds of things. Generally, the findings were relatively weak. One of the best was a study by Peter Rossi, R-O-S-S-I, who's director of the National Opinion Research Center here at the University of Chicago, and Burk and Eidston, three of them, did a book called The Roots of Urban Discontent, and they studied 10 cities much more carefully than most. They collected data, not only surveying citizens, asking them how much do you trust people, and then they would also ask how much might you, if you went to the grocery store, might someone put their finger on the scales, or might you not trust the grocery store charging you the proper? They had a question like, might they press their finger in the weight in weighing what you're charged? Asking asking citizens, how much do the police use too much force, and are you beat? Have you and it had a series of questions, especially on violence of police. Questions about teachers and social workers. So teachers fired social workers, police, and so then they had scores on this for 10 cities, and these were cities big cities that had that had and had not at the beginning never had, some that did and some that did not have urban disturbances that were mostly involving African Americans. By the end of the study, all 10 had riots, shooting, difficulties, breaking down windows, et cetera, but they had all these data. And so you had service delivery people on the street, citizens, questions of the city council and the mayor as well. And one of the findings which did come out, and where, I mean, so you could see how much did the police, so one question, how much did the police, when the police, then they surveyed, I didn't say this, they also surveyed the police. How often do you use a billy club? You know, how much do you beat people over the head, et cetera, et cetera. They asked the same thing of the social workers and of teachers and so forth. But the most dramatic, simple one was, the police said, if you correlate in regressions, statistical analysis, interrelations among these things, how much were the cities where the police beat up, and there were big differences from between Gary, Detroit, New York, et cetera, and so forth. The cities where the police beat people over the head the most, the citizens disagreed. The citizens did not complain that they were beaten over the head. They're not saying it's good or bad. They simply said they were not touched by the police. Second, what was related to citizens saying the police were too violent, and they were not bad, but they were the frequency and the counts of the type of degree of violence that was used by the police was related to what? Having a black mayor. If you had a black mayor, that is and roughly in those years at 68, after 68, Gary and Detroit had the Coleman Young in Detroit was the famous black mayor of Detroit, and those cities and then several more had later on. So that's in a sense the symbolism of having a black mayor was for sure critical, and there have been several studies of that. But most of the studies, most of the research is much less subtle than the Rossi Burk and Eidston study. Most of what you read in the press and so forth is, and you read in the American Sociological Review or the American Political Science Review. They use the census data. People would take all of the references to violence, to riots, and count the number of people who were either arrested, shot, killed, and so forth by city, by neighborhood for the whole U.S. Analyze that as a dependent variable. What was this related to? And mostly it was population size, percent African American, but it is beyond that. It didn't really have any dynamics. That is in terms of something like having the Rossi Burk and Eidston with having a black mayor. That was I'm making the point there to say it's not intuitive. Black power for sure is a hot issue, but the meaning of black power. Okay, that make another important point. Living in Bronzeville, I'll say this more explicitly, seeing this among my neighbors, knowing that they're black does not tell you what the policies are going to follow. The dozen or so people advising the alderman, people are all over the place. More police. We got to not only arrest them, they're getting arrested, but then the DA, the judges throw them out. They're not putting people in jail, etc. Other people say the problem is their mothers are not treating them, they're not teaching them how to be. It's not the schools. The schools are doing a bad job. The fathers have run away and they're not taking care of their kids. The divorce rate is too high. All these things can be mentioned, but where and how much and why are very, tricky. And the point I'm making is we have disagreement among the experts and the policymakers and the mayors and the aldermen and the smart advisors of the aldermen. Okay, so nevertheless, are there a couple of I'm gonna have to say that we'll have another video that is checking around the most difficult cities, including LA. I wrote a couple of papers on LA and where and how we can make sense of this, and I'll just give you the sort of the logic of so at this point I was consulting a lot with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'll go into that if you're interested, but basically the Conference of Mayors would have meetings of a dozen or 50 people, mostly mayors, and then talk about certain issues, such as violence or having all kinds of topics. And then they had no R&D or official part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors because they were a lobbying group. They're the organization of mayors. They knew they're nothing but political. They knew they had no ability to have an R&D group that would have legitimate results of public policy, whatever that would be attacked by people from the Kennedy School and the Harris School of Public Policy. And therefore, what they relied upon were outside academic experts. So I was one basically after about 6 years, where they started with 100 people, and we ended up with 4. So I was one of the 4 people really working with the Conference of Mayors with people, economist, mathematical modeling guy, another from New Jersey, another from MIT, etc. So we had these. What this led to was to me trying to pursue where and why LA could be used as a case, and could we find in some neighborhoods or some aspects that were being discussed in the LA public debates, because I knew the political science and commentators and top advisors for the city of LA, and we were saying, why don't we do this, why don't we do that? And I'm told you the basic answer was they talked in terms of Tocqueville. We need to have more organizations with a little. So that was their main policy. I dug a little further, and one quick follow up with was the large number of Mexicans, the moving away of lots of sort of middle class whites and more educated, affluent folks who would leave California altogether. Some of them would move to suburbs or further away. But my take on that was, let's look at this below the border. What's happening in Mexico, Central America, Latin America? They've got a lot of problems as well. And so people then were talking about, to summarize, Bogota. Bogota, when I was digging into this, had 6 times the U.S. murder rate, 6 times higher than the U.S. murder rate. And when then the mayor had a conference, and that basically I got invited to talk with him. When I arrived at the airport, there was a guy there with a legal form and a pen, and said, we can't walk through the airport until you sign this insurance form. I said, okay, what's that for? It's for life and dismemberment insurance. If you get killed or dismembered, we want to have insurance against you. we can't walk the airport. It's too dangerous to walk through the airport without you being insured. Okay, so etc. So the guerrillas sent out warnings to almost all the mayors, unless they had said they were backing the guerrillas, the mayors would be murdered. And something like 30 mayors were murdered. Just like that. Okay. So, I mean, it was, and so what I am getting to was, Mokas was elected mayor in a dramatic way, and his follow-up called Peñalosa. Mokas and Kim Peñalosa had some amazing solutions. I'll let you look up and see what you can find in a day or two, and we'll see. And I'll show you a little bit more on Wednesday. But it's fantastic stuff. And not to say that we can say it's right or wrong, but that we've got some very illuminating things that are outside the normal range of what we're seeing. Okay. Get to a couple of big points here. Let me stop for a minute for questions or comments, as I've been saying a number of things here. But let me stop. We've got a couple of you folks who weren't here very much before, and both of you, or 3 of you from San Diego is great. So we had a little bit of that discussion as you were coming in. Does anyone want to add anything now about, say, the transformation of the San Diego area and the rise of it? Just maybe let's talk about, say, for LA, Orange County, south of LA, and then the San Diego area, downtown, the port, and the suburbs. Basically, what's the makeup? What's the style? What are some of the political differences? And then the changes over time. I'm asking in part as well because there's a guy named Mark Baldassare, Baldassare. He was the director of the Survey Research Center in Orange County for about 15, 20 years. And he did more surveys. He did the surveys like the closest thing around was to the Rossi Burk and Eidston study. He surveyed the mayors, the city council members, the citizens, the organized groups, every year for about 10 or 15 years. So he has not only data at 1 year, he could compare Irvine with other Orange County towns, and Irvine, for instance, had a mayor who was the most leftist radical critic of the automobile and the industrial, the military-industrial complex. They would go out with Irvine residents in the middle of the rush hour, hold arms, and stop the traffic on the freeways, and just hold there for a couple of hours. Imagine that. Freeways and the car is the core of LA, Orange County, and that general area. So taking that on directly and saying we need public transit, we need to have buses, we don't want to have pollution of all these cars, we want to change things. And so these kinds of differences in policy are there within Orange County, even though this is called, what's the name of the airport in the Orange County Airport? John Wayne Everett. Who knows? We have at least 1 or 2 foreign. Or you know who John Wayne was? I ask you about France. Who's John Wayne?
Isn't he an actor? An actor?
Yes. What kind of actor?
Western.
What kind of Western? Yes.
Probably.
Tough, macho, military, Western, World War II, American Army. Okay, that is. Okay, that naming, and then of course a little bit later on, the governor of California.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay.
Reagan.
Ronald. Okay, so these are 3 big acts. So that so part of the LA school is that the film is part of our lives, and it's just as important. It's equally valid to any kind of statistical number you may give to us. So, public policy, the hell with that. Give us a movie. And so the film called Chinatown is considered a classic statement of the LA school in a film. Okay. I'm joining these together to say we have slowly evolving bits of research, slowly evolving experiences where people are trying things out. And in Chicago, where I know more close up than some of the other cities, even if they may not be citywide policies, within Chicago, we have hundreds and hundreds of initiatives, new policies that people are trying things out. In one school, in one high school teacher in Chicago may start giving trombone or horn lessons to 5 kids. He doesn't have any grants. He's not a nonprofit. He's officially registered. Doesn't have a special phone number or anything. He just has some kids who are students and the people in the schools, and he's really a good trombone player, and he'll so that is, there are hundreds of people like this in Chicago, and we've held conferences of this when we began to realize how important these things are, and we had a huge turnout and a lot of interest. Then we started to look at these surveys, and so I told you the difference between us and Putnam. So Putnam's basic finding is civic organizations is going down and down and down. That's a major cause of this Tocquevillian analysis. So Tocqueville and Putnam were the driver of the LA school and of the LA, I shouldn't say the school, the LA city government with creation of these little organizations. Whereas by contrast, in Chicago, we have something closer and that we could say to China. I'll say it at least to Professor Chen. The city of Chicago had a tough, big Democrat. The Democratic Party is analogous to the Communist Party in China, and the centralization and the background of before that and with it became the sense of patron-client politics. That's a major driver of the model of how most aldermen used to make policies. So they would give out. I'd have my alderman. I'd have to come to class. For example, my alderman who would be predecessor of the woman Sophia King, the same ward. I've lived in the same area of Bronzeville, as I say, basically whole life. This guy, the alderman, was a bodyguard of Mayor Thompson in the 1920s and 30s. These are the years of Al Capone. He was a personal bodyguard, and then he created a security company protecting Al Capone and his folks, and then later on others he would work for. He then was elected as alderman. He came to class, and I said, "How do you?" I had a leading question not a leading question. I had a question like, how do you help people in the neighborhood get jobs? And he said, "Well, I have 2 pockets in my jacket. Over here, I have a list of people who elected me, who did, they passed out flyers, they did community work. Then I go down to City Hall, and I go to the, quote unquote, the Office of Patronage, and I say, I need to get some positions for my folks. Can you give me some jobs?" And they tell me some places to apply. And my job as alderman is to match the 2 up. Okay. Quote unquote, I think this was recorded I'm not sure if I had I've been reporting for years doing it. We've been doing it with Bill Grimshaw, who was the campaign manager of Harold Washington. We started this Oral History of Chicago, and we've been videoing everything, recording everything we can for decades. Okay, so my quick point is Chicago is an outlier. This is clearly not a representative of America. Tocqueville tried at least to talk about America, but he was biased in leaving out most of the South and didn't develop the Wall Street individualistic Trump traditions. He focused more on New England and told a New England moralistic civic participation kind of story, and that clearly is, and many have said, what makes, if you have to choose, what makes American politics and civic life different from the rest of the world? The answer is evangelical Protestantism. We have Calvinist, strong Calvinist churches who are often highly individualized ministers and churches that are very different. Okay, I'm building on, but let me pause for a minute, as I've given you some bits out here, and I've linked you with the background of the community power section. I've shown you at least a little bit of the background. We've heard. I haven't mentioned so many. Let's say when we had let me just say one big label for this was 1968. Was the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson, the sense that power and leadership of the military-industrial complex, from a sort of a label. I mean, even Eisenhower repeated that label. He said, "Watch out for this." The 1968 labeling, or the counterculture, which has been used later on, the style of challenging the past, of challenging the establishment, of having more open and freedom, in a sense, is what Balzac wrote about 150 years earlier for artists. The artists need to be more free, need to be open, don't need to have any rules, no bourgeoisie, no middle-class propriety. We want to be able to do what we want. Okay, in a sense, that's what we got, and what is continuing in some places, especially like Berkeley. If you take Berkeley as a visible kind of illustration of a city, and San Francisco, with its big differences from LA and from most of the rest of the state. The differences are there, but the background dynamics of the '68 violence, the riots, the shooting, but then the successes in many respects. I'll just mention here one to flash forward here in the next set of readings. Browning, Dale Rogers Marshall, and David Tent, they're all from Northern California, the Bay Area. They studied 10 cities in the Bay Area, suburbs basically, and studied them after the '68 activities. There was many of them had active critical demonstrations, strikes, petitions, and so forth, and roughly 4 of them drastically voted out the city manager form of government and had a much more stronger politicized and Mexican and African American minority-oriented city council, and leadership that followed policies roughly along that kind of line. 2 or 3 that were the total opposite, and then others that were difficult to classify. So the simple point I'm making is even within one metro area, we can talk, as I did, of Berkeley and San Francisco, but within the 10 that are, that are still, some of the medium and larger size suburbs around San Francisco, we have differences. And so using these differences are what we often can really learn from, and then try to see what goes with what causes and what are the consequences that happen later on. And so just for you to read out a little bit more, as we then cite there, I mentioned here, Raphael Sonnenschein, Post-Incorporation Politics in Los Angeles. He was one of the main advisors of the city council that wanted to have Tocqueville. And I knew him well, and then we had riots, and then the election of the Republican mayor, Riordan, in Los Angeles. So we had, in a sense, the battles among the participants got more and more difficult in LA to the degree to which people were moving out, people were electing, electing a Republican, etc., in ways that I'm featuring a background which includes lots of stuff like what you saw in Chicago right now. So my point is, we can build on some bits of findings and results we have from these earlier experiences of 1968, as well as some of the broader, bigger historical context. But especially, we've had bigger surveys with more careful detail. The most visible one that I'm mentioning is Rossi Burk and Eidston, Roots of Urban Discontent. That one is the kind of thing which can feed into where we are now, and it can be used joining with the variations. And so we now are getting in China, and just to mention the 3 countries where we're using more in this course, France and the US, we got lots of variations, or just to mention France, for instance, where I've worked with people in more detail. Grenoble and Lyon have had mayors and policies. Grenoble, in a sense, is like the Silicon Valley of France. Very engineering, mathematics, computers, high tech, beautiful surroundings, mountains, skiing, and so forth. I won't go into. I'm trying to be brief, simply to say that we have dramatic variations from one city to the next within France. Even though you have the image that China and France have strong national governments, the biggest policy I told you in the first presentation, the biggest visible policy that when Mitterrand, the first socialist prime minister of France, only took power in coalition between the socialists and communists, and they nationalized through banks and others lots of the whole private sector roughly doubled. That is, the government controlled what used to be private sector went from roughly 20 to 40%, and that is drastic major policies. Okay, after that was done, there were many mayors that were elected 1 or 2, 3 years after Mitterrand was elected. Many new mayors were elected that were attacking Mitterrand and were saying, and so Grenoble and Lyon and some others did that, and these were the most visible national visible people, mayors, who were successfully elected within the socialist or maybe now in Grenoble it was not just the socialists, but that is, we had mayors who were fighting the national policies. And then I then taught at the Sorbonne a couple of times and put and participated with in some of these conferences, and we did research with French teams. So we've collected data on and through conferences, through case studies of individual mayors and cities, plus national surveys of all the French cities multiple times, with the census as well as surveys that would go to the question to the mayors, to council members, and so forth. And then we could compare these kinds of things. So the quick point I'm making is to say, even though compared to the US, we so-called have a federal system, in point of fact, if you look at many policies within China and France, there are huge local and neighborhood differences within France, and of course in the U.S. So my point is, this is a major way. If you become an attorney and you become a policymaker to a mayor, don't use the variations within your own city. And look at if you're a medium larger city like Chicago, there's massive variations and things you can learn from. And if you're not sure based on some informants, do some surveys. And now we've got new big data about all kinds of stuff which you don't have to spend millions of dollars, which you used to. I mean, the Rossi Burk and Eidston study, was very, very expensive. Now we've got these social media which are generating massive amounts of data, and these are then taken and used actively, more actively and more successfully and more conscientiously. And I would even add, I'm the only person I've heard say this, but because they don't have elections for the big positions in China, you do have a conscientiousness in ways which, at least in some ways, seems to be more successful, or at least, for instance, if we have 30, if you have 5 people send in an email and say the pothole is broken and we have a flood on my street, the Chinese will fix this faster, I have been told, and I give an informant. I wasn't there myself, but I had one student who was from Taiwan. Her father was a professor of I think of sociology, who did empirical research. She spent 3 years as a journalist in China, in mainland China, covering environmental issues. And she then contrasted this with Taiwan. And in Taiwan, they had elections, they had public hearings, they had conferences, and lots of debate, lots of conflict, lots of people demonstrating in front of the meetings and so forth. And then she, in her words, no action. In mainland China, they would have no demonstrations, no conflict, but lots of people would send in, say, how about changing this? Let's do that. Occasionally that they would have big demonstrations, but very, very few compared to Taiwan. But the simple point is that there's I don't know the numbers. Maybe the professor can give us a guesstimate. There's probably hundreds of thousands of national, regional, and local officials who are monitoring what's happening in social media and what are people requesting policies, and they're doing things. Often in some things as crude as fixing a pothole. Okay, I've thrown some things out, some of them controversial. Listen. Let's discuss. If anyone has reservations, if you want, either we won't point it at you or talk about it afterward. But let's just chat with each other now. And if we can link it to the readings and link it to the concepts we're talking about in the course, that would be great. So I'm sometimes that's explicit. It's more today. I've done this a few times, but most of what I've been saying is implicit. You've seen the linkages in the readings, but we'll get to more as we continue through the rest of the course. Tuckville, of course, and then there's a little book called Kentuckville Karaoke, which is a major criticism of Putnam's and the LA. I mean, it starts from the LA experience and why Tuckville failed. The Tuckvillian, the misapplication of Tuckvillian principles, that all we need, I won't say all, but the driver was that kind of lesson taken from Tuckville, but ignored about the context and the scenes surrounding that is so important. Okay. If three of you have really lived in San Diego, you ought to be able to give us some more subtlety about where and why that is. James Q. Wilson did when I think it was when Ronald Reagan was elected, the Commentary Magazine, the main Jewish publication, invited James Q. Wilson, who was a political theorist here, then at Harvard, and he did a paper called The Political Culture of Southern California. What would you say? What's different? So some of this is shared with Orange County and San Diego. Some of this are distinctive. So there's some things but that is the contrast among those different Orange County, so Irvine is strongly leftist activist and so forth. Many others are strong conservative, et cetera, et cetera. And then what he showed in Orange County was the citizens got more and more and more active on social issues, on women's issues, on abortion, on all kinds of the environment, very most of all for sure. But all these things moved the whole county and of LA and of California in a further, and San Diego in a democratic direction, Democratic Party. Yeah. Okay. Raphael's your name?
Yasha.
Yasha. I'm sorry. Yasha. Go ahead.
Well, to the Orange County, I'm not sure exactly if this is answering your question, but for Orange County, there's by far and away the most democratic city in Orange County has always been Santa Ana, because it's overwhelmingly Mexican American. And then Irvine is sort of like the Silicon Valley of that area. It's close to the University of California in Irvine. There's a lot of educated Middle Eastern and Asian population. So there's been that. And outside of those two, I guess northern Orange County, closer to Los Angeles, is sort of, there's a lot of Vietnamese, a lot of Korean, Hispanic, sort of lower middle class suburban sprawl from LA. And then the southern part of Orange County, which is what most people think of when they say Orange County, like San Clemente, is more white, more conservative, not ethnic at all, and very, I guess, upper middle class suburban. So that's, I don't know if that answered anything you said,
Okay.
but that's sort of how I see Orange County.
That's good, and that is to stress some of the differences within Orange County, and if you take that southern end of Orange County, it goes further in San Diego, in the areas moving into and surrounding San Diego, which had when I was doing some of that earlier field work, Pete Wilson was the mayor. He was a strong, visible Republican candidate. He was governor. He became governor of California, and was talked about as a possible presidential candidate and so forth. So that was but he was too conservative for the rest of the U.S. But I'm pointing to the interesting differences within California, where much of it that is okay. I won't go beyond that so much as to link with the classic differences between Northern and Southern California, but to go further to include San Diego in contrast to LA, and then within Orange County, all the better. Then a lot of these data, then Mark Baldassare then went on to be the California state level director of, I forgot the name of the organization, but they did some of the best surveys across the state of California and public policies for the state and for local areas within them, which are now, so he's been a major player in state policy making and serious analysis feeding into it, and so the interest is not just with LA, but why and how is LA different from further north in California, etc. So, okay, and of course my collaborator Dan Silver grew up in the San Francisco area and went to college at Berkeley, and still goes back to his family all over. So California's a useful area to compare with. More on San Diego, for instance. Any of the changes over time that people talk about how it, did your parents talk about what it was like earlier in San Diego, for instance, or other things in the schools, or?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess just in general, like just how sprawling the county, I guess, of San Diego is in relation to the actual city and the culture within the city. And from there you have such distinct neighborhoods within the county and how that's affecting, I guess, the political culture within San Diego. Within like, I guess like the wealthier communities are more northern within San Diego. And you get the affluent side, which is like, from my understanding, is still very much Republican, but is having, I guess, not as much, from my understanding now, with the overturn of the committee being more Democratic, not as having as much effect with the influx of Democratic citizens in the area.
Yeah, I mean, one simple thing that you haven't mentioned was the classic background was this was the headquarters of lots of the Navy, and so the Navy and the naval fleet was a huge economic base, and then many people from the Navy would retire and stay there and continue a next generation, and that linked with a naval kinds of gentlemanly conservatism. And so, as I mentioned, I worked with them with the Board of Fiscal Overseers, and it was the chair was the admiral of the fleet, advising Pete Wilson. Okay, so the downtown area, compared to some of the outlying suburbs, had many people. Many of the suburbs were more evangelical, southern, or let's say Oklahoma migrants who would come in the 1930s with the Dust Bowl and some of that. That is, you have a lot of more populist, probably strong supporters of Trump, more in those suburban areas, which have been more visibly gentlemanly, Republican and then Democratic now, but there are clear differences, big differences, even within as you've each pointed out. And I'm adding the economic base with the Navy, the migration from Oklahoma, still there in many of the less visible, less attractive, if you will, media covered national towns are in Central California, and I think McCarthy, who was the ousted head, was from more of a place like that. Okay, we are at the time is over. Office hours. If anyone wants to pursue anything or mention it, which you haven't so far.